day like exhibitors have as well, and the earliest delegates. It's been a slog now. I think we've all got that Sunday afternoon slump coming on that normally comes after a great Sunday lunch, but we haven't even had the benefit of that today. So, as per usual, technology has failed us and we can't hook up to the big screen. So we're going to go for a bit of a win, lose or draw type format here, where I'll just go back to the old-fashioned pen and paper. And as I said, I think the pen might even run out of steam. I'm Carly Brookfield. I'm Chief Executive of Driving Instructors Association and Diamond Advanced Motorists and anything else that's associated with our group. Come in. Today I'm going to talk about pupil profiling. And what I mean by that, what I think the uses are to the profession, how you can go about it, all those kind of things. It's not going to be an exhaustive presentation. What I'll be doing after this is recording a webinar on that for DIA members and non-members who want to book into it. And I've also written 2 articles recently for the Driver Trainer magazine that give it a bit more in-depth treatment than this. But fundamentally, one of the questions that I ask when I talk about pupil profiling is, obviously the industry, like any industry, has a lot of jargon circulating, and not everybody necessarily always completely understands what the concept is, and one of those is client-centered learning. Obviously we understand at its base what is client-centered learning. It's fairly obvious what it's focused on. But one of the questions I'd ask, and as you go through this presentation you might understand why I'm asking it, and it might seem less controversial and less pushy that I'm asking this question, is if you aren't doing pupil profiling to the extent that I'm going to look at today, is an instructor really truly being client-centered? Because if you don't know enough about your pupil, when you start to design their learning journey, when you start to think about the product that you're going to deliver them, how is that a client-centered product? So then we're going to look at what is pupil profiling, how do you do it, but also what's the value and benefit to both you and your pupils as well. In essence, knowing more about your pupils before they even get in the car with you. And by the way, there is always going to be in the audience the instructor who I am basically teaching to suck eggs. They're already doing it, they've already seen the light, or they might have worked in other industries like myself where they've done a lot of customer insight, know your clients if you've worked KYC in financial services, all of that. But it's not necessarily something that's talked about in a focused way in the industry. And you may even find them talking about it, even though I call it pupil profiling, you're doing it, but it's not called that for you. It's called for something different. So totally aware, pitch in with your ideas, by the way. I haven't got all the answers. It's just to trigger a discussion and to trigger some thoughts in your own mind about how you do it. If you're doing it already, can you improve upon that? Other things you can do. Or if you're not doing it, is it something that you want to look into doing? So knowing more about pupils, the better you can plan the individual learning journey, the more client-centered the journey is, the less risky the journey is. There's a big value in pupil profiling in terms of risk management. And that's why financial services does a lot of customer insight, a lot of know your client, a lot of due diligence on a client before they prescribe their solutions to them. And that's a safer and better result for all people. What we're going to cover in the session is, what is it? What information does it deliver, and how does that help you as a trainer? How do I get this information, and what do I do with it? And developing your knowledge in that subject as well. And I'll also touch on data protection. Because of course, the more information you accumulate on a customer, the more liability you have, the more risk that data is for your organisation. So data's got a massive benefit. And if you're a data geek like me, you're really interested in what data can do, but equally there's a risk the more data you accumulate in a business. Pupil profile is basically the process of gathering more information and insights on your pupil, the individual pupil. That's enabling you to deliver that more individualised approach to training. It better equips you with knowledge about the pupil, which not only helps them service them as a customer better, but also in their learning journey and achieving their learning goals. Come in, I've only just started, just talking about what we're going to be covering today. And again, it helps you manage the risks, which is clearly an important part of your profession, because although you're driving instructors, you're also risk management professionals as well. So that's a huge responsibility. So, some of the benefits, and I'm going to have to put my readers on now because I've got to that age. Some of the benefits is gaining useful intelligence on a pupil's learning needs. So we'll talk about that specific. I think for those of you who are in the room already, there was a presentation on learning styles. Yes, there's an element of that I'm talking about, but there's also an element of how, not just learning styles and how people like or best learn, but also if they have specific educational needs that you need to service as well. Gather valuable information on any medical history, medication or health issues that they may have, so you can start to see what the risk management aspect of pupil profiling is. Gather information about their attitude to risk. So obviously, if you work in a fleet environment, you might have already engaged in risk profiling of customers or drivers before you even start learning with them. And it also helps you get a better sense of a person's attitude to learning to drive, or what their experiences of learning to drive have been previously. And when I talk about their experiences, come in, I've only just started. It was like Peter Harvey, but basically stealing all my delegates and keeping hold of them. Come in, sit down. So I'm basically just starting off with the pit. My tech has let me down, so we're doing win, lose or draw basically on the board. And my pen will run out shortly as well, so that's why I'm talking more than drawing. Find a seat, settle down. So basically I'm just running people through what is pupil profiling, why is it useful for driver trainers, and basically what it is in a nutshell is finding out as much about that pupil as you can before you even teach them. Because as a challenge to you guys and people who talk about client-centered learning and that I'm really doing it, if you haven't found out as much as you possibly can about a pupil before they sit in the car with you the first time, how have you started to design a client-centered learning journey? You can't possibly do it if you haven't got the information other than their telephone number, the fact that they want driving lessons for a certain price and that you're going to pick them up from this point. So it's about accumulating more knowledge about your pupil that can help you deliver a better customer experience, a better learner experience, but also help you manage the risk. Because the more you know about somebody, the better you know about the risks of that particular driver. So we're just going through the benefits now. These are on my screen, so I'm having to read them out to you because everything's letting me down. So gaining useful intelligence on people's learning needs, gathering valuable information about things like medical history, health issues, previous learning to drive experiences, and as I was just about to say to you guys, it's not just about their previous learning to drive experiences, it's also maybe going to give you insight into previous driving experiences. If they've had terrible experiences with a driver as a passenger, they might be bringing some of those nerves and some of those apprehensions or some of those misconceptions they've learned from a bad driver, some of the mythology to learning to drive with you. So being able to gather that information is useful. Gather information on the attitude to risk. As we said, if you've worked in fleet, you may have come across risk profilers. What they're doing is profiling a pupil or a customer. They're asking them a series of questions which examines someone's underlying attitude to risk. Not just in driving, just basically how they approach risk in the first place. And are they very risky in their attitude and willing to just try things, whatever the risk, or are they risk averse? That should proceed with quite a lot of caution. That can tell you something that's very useful. And as I said, it gives a better sense of the attitude of somebody to learning to drive. It gives an insight, as I said, into their previous driving, riding history. It enables you to get that more individual approach. It gives you a better chance to flag and manage any risks to protect not just you and the pupil, but other road users. What is that person going to do with the information I've got that might be risky? Is there an issue with their health, medication they're taking, their attitude to risk, how they learn, how they process information, which might make them risky? And it also helps you deliver more data to populate your pupils' records. It also can give you, over time, as you accumulate data across a set of pupils, some interesting information about the type of pupils you teach, some of the commonality of the things that you're seeing with pupils, and it might help you with your CPT and developing your training as well. So where we go. So what are the kind of information do I think should you gather or could you gather? This isn't prescriptive. I don't run your businesses, so I can't tell you what you should be doing in the everyday. I can only give some advice. But the kind of things that I would look at is learning profile. So I'll go into that in a bit more detail at the moment. Learning goals. Why are they learning to drive? Why do they need to learn to drive? Because knowing that might make you change their learning journey or what you upweight and downweight in how you deliver their learning. Again, I'll cover that in a moment. Medical health profile. And I will also talk about the sensitivities of asking for certain information and how you do that as well. Risk profile, what questions can you ask to understand their risk profile? Previous driving training profile, and what other information do you think could be useful? Having just run through that small set of things, data that you could glean that might be useful, other than learning need, learning approaches, driving training experience, medical profile, risk profile, those kind of things, what other things do you think it would be useful for you as both a driver trainer and the provider of a product or service to know before somebody sat in your car for the first time? before you started delivering your product to them? What would also be a useful thing to know?
Have we got any phobias?
Yeah, could be. Any cultural or religious beliefs that might have an impact on their training or their attitude to training as well. And as a person who's delivering a product or service, how would they like to consume your product? I mean, you could say, well, in a car, Carly, on the road, doing some training. I'm talking about things like time of day, time of week. Do they want a block of lessons? Do they want to pay in a certain way? Where are they going to get picked up? Because that will also help you plan for your business as much as help you manage the pupil's learning journey in the risk sense, in the delivery of the learning experience, all those kind of things. And we all have to remember, you're a trainer, but you're also a business too. You're selling a product, and the pupil has an expectation that that will also be tailored to their needs in terms of the service and delivery as well. Let me just put this on this so I can actually see it properly myself. So, learning profile, any specific needs. What we're talking about there is questions that will help you understand if they have any specific educational needs. So obviously, disability driving instructors are here today. There's already been a talk on various, Julia Malkin, those kind of people that can tell you a lot more than my specific knowledge in that subject. But there are questions and questionnaires that you can derive some really good hints and tips how to make your own questions that would help you understand whether somebody had a specific educational need. Now, as I'll highlight afterwards, you can give somebody a questionnaire and they might not fill in every bit. They might not feel comfortable. All you can do is ask for the questions to be answered. You can't enforce that. But for every 10 people that you ask to fill it out, there will be a couple of people who don't give you that information. But for the 8 that do, that's some really useful data that you've got.
I used to ask one that helped me, but I went in on a back door with it. So I used to say, how are you with sports, with your hand-eye coordination? Because that would give me an idea of a potential dyspraxic that was then going to struggle with manoeuvres.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so there's different ways of asking the question. What I'm talking about now is what is the kind of information you can glean from profiling. There's a whole other chapter really on, well, how do I ask that question? So for example, risk profiling, they're not obvious questions. It's like if you've ever done psychometric profiling for working for either a government agency or a big institution, you won't feel like you're obviously answering a question that's got that answer that they want to hear about. But you know, you underlying, there are things that are in there to get that information out of you. Medical health profile, asking about any health conditions, physical disabilities, mental health issues, or medication that might impact driving. Now, it's tricky because the pupil might not necessarily know what issues that they have or medication they're taking that impacts driving, but actually, by the very fact that you're asking that question, it might make that pupil think there are things that they do take that they want to disclose anyway to you as the expert for you to determine whether that's got a risk for them. So that, now, obviously as the biggest provider of professional indemnity and public liability in the entire industry, every year I'm meeting with underwriters to renew our policy, and they will talk to me about what is it that we can do to lower the risk. What is it the driving instructors can do to lower their risk? And do they ask for medical information, health information? Because you see claims come in where actually there was a risk there that could have been flagged up earlier that caused an incident that enabled the pupil to bring a claim against the instructor. Yeah, exactly. As I said, there's risk profiles specifically developed to assess and rate a driver's attitude to risk, mainly used in fleet. However, there are versions that are available through things like driver metrics. They have a driver risk profiler that's very useful. Certain ones that they do are calibrated to certain types of occupational driver, for example, blue lights, but they also have one for young driver. Those of you in the profession long enough will remember MBDA, Mercedes-Benz Driving School Academy. They used to have, one of their USPs used to be, we do this risk profile. That was actually the driver metrics product. So again, I won't go into detail in this short session now, but if you look at driver risk profiles on Google, you'll find a number of companies offering that solution. And I think they can come out between, £3 to £5 per profile that you do. But if you think there's pupils that have got some issues, not only does it give you that insight from an expert point of view using those things, also it gives you sometimes, if you're really worried about a risky pupil and you're worried about passing them on to somebody else or just telling them you don't want to teach them anymore, using profilers and giving them a piece of paper that says, basically, it's not me, this is telling me that basically you might be unteachable or you need a specialist trainer that is not me. Because you'll have had conversations or arguments even in the past with parents who just don't want to see what you're saying or a pupil. Sometimes a third party piece of feedback or an expert piece of feedback can actually help you have those conversations. As I said, there's cultural considerations, client servicing considerations, and any other information we think is useful. Learning goals is really important, because why somebody wants to learn to drive, why they want a license, do they need to drive for a specific purpose, will be something that will help you tailor the learning experience. So a simple question like, why are you learning to drive? What is your goal in learning to drive? Will give you, for example, somebody who's telling you that they are going to be an occupational driver. And then you can ask a set of supplementary questions, which will help you develop your understanding of what their risks will be, and therefore how you will focus their training in another sense. So, for example, I'll give you a case study. You have somebody who comes to you and says their learning goal is they're going to be a PCV driver. You can then ask them a few more supplementary questions, which is what kind of shifts are you going to be doing? What kind of road environments are you going to be driving in? What times of day are you going to be driving in? And you would probably approach the learning journey of somebody who is mainly going to do nighttime work, maybe, for example, driving for airport staff going at long shifts during the night, mainly driving on urban roads. But you might treat somebody who tells you that actually they're a farm labourer and they're going to be driving on rural roads predominantly and doing different times of day. Because if you know about occupational driving and some of the risks associated with them, you can start to tailor the learning journey to those specific risks like easily imaginable that they are driving tired. They're driving in low light situations. With urban roads, there's a known risk of driving on with rural roads and urban roads. So again, knowing the goal and knowing that information about when they're going to drive, what pressures are they going to be driving under, what kind of things are they going to be facing as risks before you have them in the car for the first time. Of course, you're going to do the basics with that person, but you're also going to focus on their eventual mode of driving and when they're going to do it. And you're going to be focusing on knowing that's their risks. This is where I really need to focus. As I get them nearer to independent driving, I also need to get them nearer to cognizant decision making on their own about identifying those risks and being able to mitigate them. And I don't like, as someone who's worked in a lot of risk management and kind of risky areas, I don't particularly like risk management itself as a term. Risk management always implies the risk had already happened and you're in the active management phase, you're having to deal with it. Risk mitigation is more about that forward planning, is thinking what are the risks that could come my way and how can I stop them happening in the first place, rather than having to actually wait for them to happen and actively managing them as well. And that's why Pupil profiling is a risk management device, as well as a way of deriving more information to you to help you be more client-centered as well. And so we could go on and on with examples. There could be an older driver who's been recently widowed and she needs to drive or he needs to drive for specific reasons, but you might be able to glean from that a certain nervousness, a lack of driving experience because the other partner's always driven. There's known issues with older drivers that you might want to tackle. So knowing those learning goals is really important in tailoring that learning experience as well as managing risk. Briefly touching on cultural considerations on its own, there's a piece of text that I'll read out to you now, and it's not just about the learning profiling of somebody for your own needs as a trainer. It's quite important to how ADIs perform and what the benchmarks are for them, because how cultural and religious factors may affect the options available to support the learning process, such as inability to attend sessions on particular days of the week, sensitivities about making eye contact, and the belief that it's bad manners to contradict the teacher. What's that text from?
National Standard.
That's somebody who knows their national standard. So if you actually look at the national standard, and I've just pulled that one out, in unit 6.2, which is all about designing learning for programs for people, it talks quite a lot. When you think about what I'm talking about in terms of pupil profiling, then you read that unit, there's quite a lot in there that you can answer through pupil profiling, through knowing more about your pupil to design appropriate learning interfaces, servicing of the pupil and their learning journey. So, it's even in the national standards, the blueprint for driver trainers is how you approach that pupil is about actually gathering knowledge about that pupil before you start. So, there are cultural considerations for certain pupils, for example, time of day and year that will suit them best, or where there's going to be challenges for them in terms of learning to drive, attending lessons, things like that. It could be about the gender of trainer. They would need a need for a specific gender of trainer. It could be in some cases that the pupil might have to be chaperoned because of cultural religious beliefs as well. So all of those insights to you are useful because it helps you tailor their learning journey and their customer experience more keenly to that particular pupil. And also, it's great in terms of ensuring that you are complying with the equality and diversity legislation and delivering on that side of things as well, that you're seeking to understand, because equality and diversity is not just buzzwords of government, it's about respect and understanding. Not about tolerance, it's about understanding your pupils, understanding what they need, understanding where they're coming from, so you can better communicate and deliver to them as well.
I remember in Ramadan, I had a few girls that I was teaching at the time, and they were just, because they were fasting,
Yeah.
they didn't have the concentration factor, so we agreed to we leave it until after
Yeah.
the Ramadan period had been done. So
And-
it affected the cognitive.
And these things could be, there could be concentration factor and distraction issues that come from information you've gathered about someone's cultural and religious beliefs. You could have derived that sense rather than solid information, but you can derive a sense at least, without being judgmental of somebody or prejudicial. You could derive a sense that, okay, I'm 47, hands up, no, thanks to those of you who thought I was 21, very flattering, but I'm 47 now. Sorry for the men who are sensitive in the ear, but I will be going into a time of a woman's life now that's not very pleasant, and one of the side effects of that is brain fog, which as a working female is extremely frustrating. So if we're moody already, losing that sense to be able to concentrate is even more hell on earth for our partners. So there are things like that you could derive. You can't just look at someone's age and say, is that an issue? But there could be medical and health issues which will very much pinpoint, something that you need to be watchful of in that pupil. And yes, you might see it in training, and it might emerge in training, but actually if you add some of that data and that knowledge beforehand, it might make you a bit better prepared to deal with those issues in training as well. Client servicing considerations, as I said before, what is the time of day or week that person wants to learn? You are a provider of a product. Often hear people in the sector saying, I set up this business to service myself. Fundamentally, that's what they're saying to me. I set up this business because I wanted to run my own business and run my own agenda. And what you're fundamentally saying there is, I did this to service me and me only and to suit me. Well, that's not a business model. If you're selling a product and you're servicing a product, you're doing it for customers. So you have to be willing, obviously, to be flexible in how you deliver it and meeting customer needs. Otherwise, you ultimately won't be successful in that. So when they want to learn, you can coach people to be doing things that you want them to be doing, but actually finding out some information about what they do want does actually help you coach them to your conclusions and what you want, and upsell things to them. Type of lessons, single block, 1 hour, 2 hours intensive, how would they like to pay? We've still got people who want to take cash in the car. I won't buy from you then. I'm not the queen, never carry cash. Mm-hmm. So, and I want to pay in a different way, and I want to pay all up front. I don't want to be... So people, finding out these things, it sounds really tiny things, but it's building up this much bigger picture of this person as well. Are there... Go on.
Like you said, it's managing your business. It's your business.
Yeah.
If you book them up, then you know your income's coming in.
Yes.
And then you've got your cancellation period. If they don't meet the goals,
Yeah.
and they meet the terms and conditions, then they still have to
Yeah.
pay for their lesson.
And as a marketer, I'd always say, selling in volume, even if you had to discount it, and having that income locked in is better than drip, 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 which has always been the fault of the industry.
All our students, and we
Yeah.
have once you try it,
Yeah.
so can you not do this and do that? No, I'm sorry.
But the flip side of that is, if you do sell me a block of lessons, then you keep saying to me, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that, sorry, I can't do that, then I might be asking you for, a refund or walking away without the money, but I might trash your business in the meantime, saying you weren't, not you personally, but you know what I mean, you're not flexible, you have. So if you actually, you've actually gleaned from the customer up front what their lesson pattern is likely to be, at least you've got that knowledge up front. And these questions may be things that you might even ask before you take somebody on board. We might do them on the onboarding process of somebody you've already contracted to or whatever. Or you might do it, some of these questions are really useful to determine whether you would actually teach that pupil in the first place. So obviously the national standards in that same unit also says, I'm really paraphrasing this badly here, but it also says there's going to be times that you have to decide that you are not the appropriate trainer for that person. So you might do even a simple pupil profile, asking some questions about their attitude to risk, what their driving experience has been, their driver training experience has been, and a few other questions. And already in about 5 questions, you might go, I don't want to touch this person. And you can pick things up so for example, I do a lot of representation of members' appeals and tribunals and also interviews under conduct. So if you get into trouble and you're a DIA member, I'm probably the person that's coming in to fight for you on your corner. But you will see a story emerging probably before the ADI has in the case history. You will see that there is a pupil there that has gone through about 5 or 6 trainers and it's always been the trainer's fault. And that just doesn't necessarily ring true. And it's a deflection and an abdication of responsibility. There's always been a problem. So if you had that information beforehand, even if they were supplying it in a honest way, in an open way, you might start to read through that and think, there's some issues here with this person, not necessarily with the trainer. And it might give you some information, decide that not necessarily you wouldn't train them, but you maybe have to interrogate some of those issues. Why did they keep failing with those different trainers? What was the actual problem? So you might not get all the information you need up front, but the information you ask for up front might lead you to ask other questions that you develop in your relationship with them that will again help you tailor the learning journey. Or, in some cases, help you decide to manage your risk and not teach that pupil at all, or help the pupil by referring them on to a specialist who may be able to deliver a better learning experience for them. So when I talk about the kind of questions that you might ask in the kind of learning approach section or the specific educational needs, you might draw out information that you just think, it's not for me, it's beyond my competence. And there is nothing wrong in saying something is beyond your competence. That's why you would work with other colleagues to refer pupils to them, hopefully a reciprocal arrangement that they refer pupils back to you that are more in your zone as well. So there's those kind of things. As I said, I've done 2 articles in Driver Training Magazine available online, and I'll shortly be doing a webinar, and I'm also going to be creating some sample questionnaires for people as well, for people to see, because I know you can probably sit down yourselves, you're all intelligent people, and think of the questions, but just sometimes we're busy. It's better to see how somebody else does it as well. I'm sure as soon as I publish them, somebody who develops apps will probably try and sell you an app with all that information in it as well. But good, that's great. But I think it's helpful to have some guidance on that. How do I get the information? So some of the things that I've just talked about, fairly sensitive questions to some people. I'm TMI, I'm too much information. Ask me anything, I'll tell you more than you ever wanted to know. But some people don't want to give away that information. Now, Generation X, who you mostly deal with, they are, and emerging into Y, and Z to a certain extent as well, they are strangely, as marketers, we study these trends, they are strangely quite a compliant generation. You ask them a question, they're quite honest and open about it, and they feel they have to answer the question. But with maybe some older customers, we're quite suspicious. What do you want my data? What are you asking me that question for? What are you going to do with it? So, as I said, you're not always going to get the answer, and some of the questions are quite sensitive. So I would suggest that if you are going to design a questionnaire or put together a survey to gather this information, there's always a disclaimer on it, that it's voluntary that you supply this information, unless you have a demand from an insurer that they say you have to have these questionnaires filled out. So say, again, you're doing something like fleet, you might be required to have a medical fitness questionnaire filled out first. But there's always a disclaimer. You should say, we'd like you to fill it in as fully as possible and honestly as possible, because that will, and then that's when you have to say, what's in it for them? What's the benefit for them of supplying the information? Because this will help us better design your learning journey and help you achieve more successfully. Or this will help me keep you safer in the training environment if I know this information. This will help me be a better trainer to you, rather than you must give me the information because it's for my benefit. You've got to make the benefit theirs. But as I said, for every 10 people you ask, 2 might refuse to ask it. Okay, that's fine. But for the 8 that you get the information, or even the 5, if we're being cynical, it's 5 more people's information that you've had before. It's data that you didn't have before. It's 5 more people that you're going to be more client-centered for as well. And so, it's also giving an impression that you want to know, that you're interested. If I ring you up and my daughter's 11, but in a few years she's going to be the driving age. If I ring you up and you just want to tell me what the lessons are and when you're going to pick me up, I'm not necessarily going to think you're a great professional. I'm going to think, why aren't you asking me questions about my daughter that enable you to deliver a better learning experience? I'm not going to have that much confidence. I'm going to think you're in it for the money and you're just somebody who's schlepping out driving lessons, sausage factory. Get the names in the book, get the job done, get the money in. That's not a professional. So, I think asking the questions can actually make you look like a more professional setup as well. And there's lots of instances in our life where we are required as customers to be profiled before we even engage in the product. You buy an investment product, you're thoroughly profiled, KYC, know your client. Even if you go to a beauty salon now for a treatment, you're going to be asked to fill out a questionnaire before you even go in there as well. So whilst we think it's tedious, there's a good percentage of people who are filling it out because it offers an advantage. How do you get the information in a practical sense? So there's the making people comfortable for it, there's the selling them why they should give you the information. This is the practical side of it. Simple questionnaires. Obviously, I've given a lot of things that you could ask, but a simple questionnaire will get all that information back to you without it being onerous for the person filling it in or onerous for you to do it. You could do them as paper-based things and just send them out on an email when you pick up the phone. Yes, I can offer you driving lessons, but I need to ask you a few questions first. I'm just going to send you a quick questionnaire. Or you've agreed to do the driving lessons, you want to hop to that stage, but you say to people, before your first driving lesson, do you mind filling this out and sending it back to me? It really helps me tailor your journey to you. E-surveys are brilliant and e-surveying tools. So they're not just about customer satisfaction surveys. There's tools and kits in things like MailChimp and SurveyMonkey that will create you a survey and crunch the data. So whilst you're out in the car, the survey is being sent out and it's filled out by your pupils, data is being downloaded, you're able to look at it often as a series of graphs or information that's far more easily digestible for you as an instructor. And also, if you're using any kind of pupil management dashboard, as I said, I'm sure there's people who are going to be cottoning on to the idea of wider pupil profiling and building that into apps and pupil management tools in the future that, a bit like we used to do in investment banking, that you do your KYC, it would automatically go into the client's record, populate that, flag any risks for us, and that's how we would deliver their solution, looking at those things in their record. And there'd be automatic things telling you to constantly keep a watch on those things as well. So as I said, some pupil management apps may have elements of this in the moment. I'm not aware of ones that ask as many questions as I'm talking about for the reasons we're talking about. I think that will come in the future. If you are an app developer and you're interested in that area, please come and talk to someone like myself first. I've worked with a lot of tech startups. I've worked on a lot of customer insight projects for lots of different industries, and there's an insight that a non-tech person who actually looks at customer profiling that could give you to do that, particularly for the driver training industry as well. Very happy to help with that. People say to me when I talk about this subject, well, when should I do this? So I talked briefly about you might do it before you even agree lessons or agree to teach somebody. You might do it when you've agreed to teach them just before they get in the car. You might do it sometimes because you've taken somebody on and you started to be not that sure there's something there and you want to start to ask a few questions. And you might try and, sensitively do it in I've just started to ask all my pupils to fill in these pupil questionnaires. I know we're 6 months in, but it'd be useful if you could do that. It helps me with my performance management, my CPD. That could get out some stuff without you having to interrogate them in the car about, are you feeling particularly hormonal today, Carly? Because I'm noticing a bit of irritability and the fact that you can't concentrate for toffee. There might be things that you can do about that. Kind of conversations that my partner has with me when he's driving with me. I do think, though, my strong recommendation would be before they even get in the car, because the risk management issues, if you knew about some of those medical issues, and if you see some of the public liability and professional indemnity claim profiles that I see, there are a few simple questions would have avoided that. Not the claim. The claim is an expense, and it's something we don't want to have on a policy. However, it's more about the person. When I worked in medical indemnity, it was the same thing. It's not about the amount you have to pay out to pay for the fact that doctor's taken out the wrong kidney. It's about the fact that somebody's had the wrong kidney taken out and they've got a lifetime of things happening to them now. It's, again, risk mitigation, stopping that risk happening rather than having to manage it. So in that sense, if you only do it for risk management purposes, it should be before you even get them in the car for the first time. Going and meeting somebody as well, from a lone worker perspective, going to meet somebody you've never met, you know nothing about, particularly if it's in an isolated address or environment, male, female, whatever gender, you may be at risk in your profession, and you haven't got any information about them. There could be things in that questionnaire that at least might give you a signal that might make you manage the risks of that encounter from that perspective. So again, it's multifaceted.
Early in my days of getting into the ADI, I've got people going online with BSM or AA back then, yeah? You don't know what this person is, who this person is. When I first had him, I knew he was using substances.
Yeah.
So, questioning him, no, I haven't had anything. I was fine last night, I'm fine today, I woke up. But I can see, you don't even open your eyes.
Yeah.
I can smell stuff.
Yeah.
You're not there 100%.
And you may want to couch your questionnaires in terms of making sure there are things that give people comfort. If they do disclose things, they're done in full confidence, and they're not done to censor them. They're done to make us understand there's certain behaviours and things that you're going to do that might be risky because you're an habitual cannabis user that maybe a year ago, yeah, but it's still got an impact.
Sessions with him, then I've contacted customers and said, I'm at risk here.
Yeah.
I'm not having him back in my car. I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
not going to train him.
And even if you haven't necessarily got all that information out in the questionnaire, if there's something in there that triggers something, at least you can start a conversation with that piece of paper or with that in front of you.
For fifth, I did have him, and I said, okay, we'll see, because you're not. He came, I'll go through this, and I've been diagnosed with this and that, and
Yeah.
not postnatal, but post-traumatic.
Yeah. PTSD. Yeah.
So I thought, well, I did ask you at the outset of your first lesson, you said nothing to me.
Yeah.
And then when they go online, there's nothing of those categories as boxes that they can tick
Yeah.
pre-lesson or medical conditions,
Yeah.
which they should. So we kind of have an idea that we can ask these certain
Yeah.
questions, and they won't mind if we did ask
Yeah.
these questions.
Yeah. So you can have tick boxes in there. So you could have the kind of tick boxes are the known things that you might want to know, like dyspraxia, dyslexia, autism, all those kind of things. But then you could have the other box, which is there any learning or specific educational need or physical disability or medical history or use of pharmaceuticals, legal or non-legal, that you think may impact your ability to drive or ability to concentrate for long periods? Because they might not think about it in the driving context, but actually if you couched it, as you said about sports, in some of the terms, they might. So you will develop your individualised approach to this. So these are takeaways for you to sit down and think how you would use these in your business. I can give you templates, but that's the beauty of templates. You build on them from your experience and you add things in as well. Even if you decide you don't want to profile pupils at a certain point of inquiry, I would send that questionnaire out in the first lesson. And dealing with insurers over many years in indemnity and liability insurance, I can see where the market's going. And every single year, I get asked to put more and more layers of risk mitigation in with our members. So you'll get, for DIM, you'll be getting more and more things that you're required to do. And that will be the same for every indemnity insurance. And it will be things like, what did you do to determine whether that pupil was risky on the road, too risky for you to teach, could cause a problem? Because it could result in you having a claim refused and no defence because you didn't actually undertake what is reasonable measures to assess the pupil before you even took them out. So we talked about risk quite a lot. We also talked about how it helps you develop a knowledge of whether you're the most appropriate tutor. So in the national standards, the actual words are to transfer the learner to an appropriate colleague where their learning needs exceed your competence, such as learners with physical or cognitive disabilities with which you are not familiar or where you cannot provide a suitably adapted vehicle. So having that knowledge beforehand goes, you know what, I'm not the best person, but I know somebody who is. And if you don't want people, it's useful at the start. I also think if you're going to take this to the nth degree, as somebody like me probably would, I would also maybe sometimes people profile through their learning journey as well. So we're about to start delivering a major Department for Transport funded initiative called Milestones, which is looking at would a modular approach to learning to drive work if pupils were mandated to do 5 or 6 core modules, mainly centred around the risks of learner drivers, and they couldn't not do those. There wasn't just a driving test and a theory test. They actually had to complete these competencies before they even went for driving test. Would that have an impact in learner risk profile of learners? And in that, there's lots of profilers that we will do to understand whether somebody's risk has changed over the learning journey, whether they've got less risky, what their learning attitude was at the start, and has that adapted over the cycle as well. So it's, you could actually track pupils with questionnaires through their learning journey for your own knowledge as well. And actually you could do, if you looked at a pupil when you took them on board and they were identifying characteristics such as a real nervousness and fear of learning to drive because of bad driver training experiences or driving, yet when at the end of their learning, you took specific questions from your original questionnaire and put them into almost like a customer satisfaction, performance survey, you might actually be able to track that you had a pupil identifying as extremely nervous about learning to drive, that you ask them that question about how they feel about driving now after they've trained with you, and you get a really positive result that they say, I feel much more confident in driving. So you can track what impacts you're having with people, using some of the questions from the original survey transplanted into a post-learning survey with you as well. As I said at the top as well, the moment that you obviously start to accumulate, I mean, holding personal data anyway is what you do because you've got people's names, addresses, email addresses, so you are already considered to be a data controller as a business. And with that becomes responsibility, and we always suggest to members that they join the Information Commissioner's Office programme. I think it's about £35 a year to register you as a data controller. That's inflation for you. Is that anything to do with the cost of fuel? And, so you're already a data controller, even holding the scant details that you've got. And I don't care whether you've got them in a concertina file, an app, or on a hard drive or whatever, you are controlling data, you are responsible for that data. It is not yours, it's someone else's, so you have to protect it. If you're starting to do these profiles and you're asking more and more questions, you started to accumulate more personal data. That is not a reason not to do it. Oh God, no, I don't want that risk. The benefits outweigh the risks in that sense, but clearly you need to be able to manage that data if you started to hold medical information, health information, all those sensitive pieces of information as well. So make sure you're up to date on your data protection responsibilities as an organisation, as a small business. You don't get away with it by saying I'm just a sole trader driving instructor, by the way. Big businesses, small businesses, you can all be, again, on the professional indemnity policy, we often have people who've inadvertently lost or shared data, personal data that they shouldn't have done. And that could be 35, 40, 100,000, even more than that, depending on what value is placed on that person's privacy and personal data. So hopefully I've really whizzed through that. And sorry I didn't have the presentation up. I'll try via mic to share the presentation so you've got more detail afterwards. As I said, I'll be running some DIA webinars. Members, non-members are very welcome to attend. And I've done the articles and I'll try and put some templates together. But there are many risks in driver training from other road users, from road and weather conditions, and even, who would have thought it, a global pandemic. Those of us who are involved in business continuity planning advisory for companies, we had lots of risks that we were trying to manage and lots of things we were going to do in a disaster. Very few of us actually envisaged a disaster where you couldn't go to work in an office and that we'd be out of circulation for 2 years. But actually, we know one of the biggest risks can be the pupils themselves. And without screening them effectively on many levels before they get in the car, and get in your asset, which is a car, and you're the biggest asset to your business, the person, and there are risks to road users as well, it makes common sense to me that you would do a little bit more digging on your pupils than just getting their name, their phone number, and whether they're willing to pay your hourly rate or not. So there's a risk management boon. The question I ask at the top is, are you truly being client-centred if you're not profiling your pupils beforehand? It's interesting, people who've been doing client-centred learning presentations today, or some of the gurus in the business, some of them I don't see that much about people profiling. So even the gurus in the business are not necessarily looking at what it is that it takes to become client-centred. What is your learning journey about the pupil that helps them deliver their learning journey? So that's basically on the concept, some of the things to look at. How would you glean the data? What do you do with the data? How do you protect the data? And what are the benefits of all that? Are there any experiences people want to share? Any tips? Any questions on that subject?
I used to do a bit of both of that. So it would always be the first initial phone, because I'm a sole trader on my own, I'm not with a company. So the first initial phone call would be quite in depth about what they wanted, what they were looking for, what they were, and all that. And then when I got them in the car, I used to have a CRM, so I built it myself.
Yep.
What I wanted to ask with all the medical stuff and things
yep.
like that. So I knew quite a lot about them before we even got driving.
Yeah.
And I've actually I closed it down 2 years ago after 20 years of using it, and I wish I'd kept it now. But I used to do all that before I went, so it's like before you even start driving out there on the road, you know exactly what you're going to do
yep.
because you've already planned that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how it's now been put into a...
The idea of profiling customers is age-old. As a marketing person, I will tell you that most of the things we come up with are plagiarised from other industries and other people. It's like 99%. So you learn from other industries. I've been fortunate, I've had that background in other industries. And as time goes on, it gets easier to do these exercises. So you mentioned a CRM. Modern CRMs can draw in information from other apps and other tools and populate the record for you. So you don't want to spend all that time data inputting something on a piece of paper. You want to do a survey that delivers that information to a pupil record, and actually sophisticated now enough to be able to flag the risks that you should be asking more questions
But
about.
what was interesting with doing it and inputting it there and then, it was a conversation in the car.
Yes.
So by doing it there and then, I'll just take your licence, you know,
Mm.
it's just that. And by having the conversation, I actually got more out of it. So that was like profiling in person.
Yeah.
Conversation.
And by the way, this is, as I said at the top, it's not prescriptive. If you feel there is a different way you do it via conversational methods and writing notes, and that feels more natural for you to do, and the pupil doesn't feel that as a formal process, so they're more willing to engage in it, that's fine. But it's just like any data exercise, you've got to have a mode of capturing it and a mode of a way of making that data usable. So if you just have a conversation, it's just in your head, that's great. But if that goes out of your head, or it's not accessible to, if you work in a franchise with other people, or you train with the trainers, that's key person risk, is information in one person's head that can go under a bus the next day. You know, putting data into systems is sharing data and protecting data in itself. It can expose data, obviously, but it makes it more accessible. So I would think about, okay, I'm going to have these key questions. I have a way of, you know, doing it verbally so they don't feel like they're interrogated, but I have a system of making notes of that, and what do I do with those notes afterwards, and you know, what do I use to do with that?
I used to think, I don't want them sitting there for ages thinking that, oh, this is my money wasted. So I used to do that half an hour as a free.
And there is another benefit.
Getting to know you session.
If you're doing this already, but you're doing it verbally in the car, in lessons, this is a time-saving device. If you can get some of this information beforehand, you're not having to use those first lessons to get the information. In fact, you might use those first lessons to glean more on some of the issues that they flag, or some of the other questions that come out of the questions. It could save you time doing it before you even take them in the car for the first time. You know, that first lesson is not being spent at the side of the road. Yeah. It's actually being spent on the road. And you know how that first lesson should go because you know more about that pupil before you get them in the car. Yeah? Yeah. Any more questions, or have I exhausted the final dregs of energy that you had at the end of a full day of pure driving instruction? As soon as I got back to my desk and have developed them, I'm going to be drawing through some standard questionnaires that already exist in things like specific educational needs, because they have some great ways of questioning people to find out underlying issues. I'm also going to be looking at some risk profilers and breaking down some questions from there as well. But yeah, I'll just be producing like a draft template that people can look at. And also, by the way, ain't nothing perfect. So if you see things in there that you think that question could be better phrased, or you've had a background in that area and you know there's a better way of asking that question, please let me know. And you know, hopefully we can start to have, you know, a more widespread adoption in the industry of people truly having an insight into a pupil before they embark on their learning journey, so we're able to you know, really satisfy the question, are we being truly client-centered in our learning? You are free to go, huh?
Is that going to be emailed to us?
Yes, if you're a DIA member, yes. So if you haven't joined, join today for half-price membership at the conference. That's the advantage of membership.
Thank you.
And as I said, the 2 articles for members are already online, and they do have some sample questions in them in Driver Trainer if you go through your back issues in the members area, the last 2 issues. May even be a copy of the magazine on the stand that has those in.
Thank you.
No problem, thanks.